Hey everyone, it's been a little while since I've done a build video like this, huh? Well, I'm back, and I've learned a lot more, so I can at least sound a little bit more knowledgeable on the subject of spring trapping. So first, I'm sure you're asking, why Springtrap again? Haven't you done like 3 versions before? Okay, look, I have, but I like him so much, and I'm doing him again. So my old Springtrap suit is now gone. He burned in the Texas heat, unfortunately, and it was extremely hard to wear, so after I'd finished all my builds for PAX 2024, I decided I really wanted to do another non-hard shell character. While I initially was going to do Withered Freddy and Foxy, I decided against it last minute because I didn't want to just do characters that'll appear in the second movie. And I started thinking, who isn't going to appear in a future movie? And then I realized the conveniently non-game accurate Springtrap design that currently is present in the movies. I then immediately decided, I'll just do another game Springtrap, but this time, better. And now we're here. So to preface, this isn't much of a tutorial as it is a process of the building of the suit. It's more of a look into my brain as I adapt and design a character like Springtrap into a wearable suit. I also forgot to record some of the bigger chunks of the build process because I got really into it. Hopefully by the next video I can afford some actual filming equipment. Okay, now we can actually start talking about the build. So at first my idea was just to adapt game Springtrap as accurately as possible with some extra details, similar to the yellow rabbit from the movie, like the burnt withering and the foam on his body and the way that's cut. So I made a quick mock-up using the Help Wanted model. While I did initially retopologize the model itself, I did have to completely redo the mesh to be unwithered. I also did a bunch of resizing, and it's basically not the same model anymore, but it looks like it. During this part of the process, I also knocked out all the animatronics and the head mechanisms. As soon as the 3D mockup was done, I went to my good friend Austin to do some concept drawovers I could base some ideas on. He ended up getting pulled away to another project, but we did get the concepts for the eyes done. So I decided to just go with those first. To me, the eyes are always the most important part of a build to nail. They're the main focal point people will immediately look at when they see something. In this case, I wanted the eyes to look really haunting. So when you make eye contact with Springtrap, you just immediately feel uncomfortable. Initially, I wanted them to be just completely organic, and that was the direction Austin went with the art, but by the time I ended up getting to physically painting the resin whites, I ended up leaning a little bit more into the plastic look based on actual animatronic eyes and how they tend to yellow with age, though I did add some extra organic looking effects like veins and red spots to leave it ambiguous. But of course, the versions I painted on video ended up failing in the clear coat casting stage, so I just redid them off camera. Same deal, just a little bit darker around the edges. After I got some more successful versions from the molds, I coated them in an extra layer of epoxy to get them to look extra shiny and gross. Okay, now let's get back to the main part of the build. So I printed all the body parts I'd modeled previously at a 1/4 scale, and then I patterned them with some masking tape. That pattern was then transferred to some paper, digitized, and then printed at a larger scale. I did print the feet at 1:1 scale, since the patterns were going to be more complicated due to the angular nature of Springtrap's feet. Those were then patterned, but I didn't bother digitizing them since they wouldn't need to be upscaled. The head was also done being printed by this point, so I finished it with some spray fillers and did some light sanding in between each layer. The idea behind the withering on this interpretation of Springtrap was similar to the yellow rabbit. I really dig that effect of the fabric and foam being eaten away around the holes, so I decided to do it on the whole Springtrap suit. I begun the process of transferring the blown up and cut out patterns to EVA foam. That EVA foam was, of course, graciously provided by Coscom Cosplay Supplies. They also sponsored the last Springtrap build years ago, so it was great to have them help out again. You can actually use the code REGULARSAUCE to get a % off your total order, so if you're looking to build your own FNAF suit, they've got all the foam you'll need. Okay, anyways. After cutting out all that foam, I did some heat forming with all the parts to get everything a little bit more rounded out. I then glued all the individual pieces together using contact cement. Now, one of the more tedious parts of the process. I wanted to try to get the withering as game accurate as possible, and if you've seen what that looks like, you'd probably know his withering is the most unrealistic thing ever. But I, thought it might be worth at least trying to see what happens. This meant I needed to study and find every single hole placement. which was extremely fun and not more tedious than I could have ever previously imagined. After spending about 2 nights just doing hole cutting and meticulously spinning Springtrap around in Sketchfab, I did some sanding and dremeling around the edges of the holes to look like the yellow rabbit and to add some extra depth. If you end up doing anything similar to this, please make sure you wear respiratory equipment. If this stuff gets in your lungs, you will become like Springtrap. Dead, I mean. You'll be dead. Eventually. But sooner than you should be. Once that was all done, I blasted it with air to clean off the particles of sanded foam, and then I coated it all with Plasti-Dip. This just seals the foam in and makes it look smoother. It also helps with the adhesion of paint. I went over it all with brown paint because I figured I'd eventually be darkening it, which I did eventually do when I airbrushed the fabric. Somewhere in the middle of this, I also begun doing the ears, which I patterned at full scale and then built from EVA foam. The endo was built from some aluminum bits I found at Lowe's, with a hinge in the middle I screwed together on it. I added some springs to really get it to wiggle, and I'm really happy with how bouncy they came out. The inner ears were also built around this time. I made them out of EVA foam as well. I ended up getting a similar effect to the yellow rabbit's inner ears, but not completely matching. It's more reminiscent of it. I'm sure by now you've noticed the yellow rabbit and game Springtrap are in fact very different in design. Somewhere in this process I did some hands which I 3D printed. I tried to get some similar articulation to my V3 Springtrap suit, but with the game endo look, the old method hinges I used would wiggle a lot, so I tried to do something a little less wiggly. I ended up doing the hands entirely before furring the suit, so I printed the fingers, primed and finished them, did some rust effects, and then I assembled them. Very similar to my old Springtrap hands in concept, but in execution they're probably some of the most robust hands I've designed up to now. Once that was done, it was time to get into sewing. I did all hand sewing on this build to match with the fleece I was using. Whenever I was done sewing a piece with fabric on it, I'd then have to viciously cut it up, which was painful to have to spend so much time sewing stuff and then screwing it up, but it at least looked cool. I did have the main batch of fabric dyed because I cannot dye 12 yards of fabric in my 2-bedroom apartment. However, I did end up hand dyeing the smaller sections for the lower legs. You'll notice that Springtrap's lower legs get darker as they go lower. The hands came out really nice. I managed to recreate that weird clipping effect by making the fingers big like they are in Scott's original model. However, having to hand sew 24 individual finger pieces was torture, though it was only a bit worse than having to cut 24 individual finger pieces from foam, and then individually heat form and glue together 24 individual finger pieces. I'm happy with it though. Before I begun the withering, I also did the effects on the teeth, which I printed and then airbrushed yellow. I did add some extra greens and browns to make them extra gross, as well as some extra touch-ups done by hand to make the cracks come out more clearly. Now onto the fun part, the withering. Now going by the yellow rabbit from the movie, you'll notice that there's burn marks all around his withering. That's what I did for this entire Springtrap build. I used a soldering iron to burn all the edges of the fabric that had holes in it, as well as adding some extra burn spots around to make it seem like the fabric is also aging in other parts that aren't ripped open. To the observant eye, you'll also notice that I tried to recreate the veins his original model has. That was a last minute call, but I think it worked out beautifully. This burning process took about 2 days, and I wore a heavy respirator so I wouldn't. Once that was done, I begun airbrushing. So, by this point I was getting really close to my initial deadline. I wanted to have Springtrap completed by the 26th of October for Halloween, so it was crunch time. This meant using my phone tripod I was recording with for a light stand I could use outside on my patio. But we'll work with what we have. So the whole suit was magically airbrushed off camera. I was super happy with the final effects. I tried to get somewhere in between the movie Cloud Spec reminiscent look and the AR color scheme. Now onto the parts I've been dreading. The endoskeleton. I was dreading this part because it's like an entire secondary suit, and by this point I was already past my initial deadline, so I was pretty worried. It actually ended up not being too bad. I just adapted the ideas seen on the actual game endo and made them bigger to fit an actual human underneath. I also did an endo cage system to eat up some of the space in the torso to make it more visually distinct. I based this off Tina the Endo from the movie. You'll notice a lot of rough textures and gashes all over the metal. I thought this would make it look more aged underneath, like this thing has really been jostled around in the 40+ years of it existing, and I think it came out really nice. After doing some metallic spray paint over the Plasti-Dips parts, I did some black paint washes over it before I did the rust effects. For the corpse and flesh sections, I ended up just doing them game accurate out of foam dowels and sanded down chunks of foam. I thought it would be cool to have the design embrace the idea that the flesh on the endo is in fact a new, regrowing flesh from Afton coming back to life. I was mostly inspired by Burn Trap a bit as well. Now all of the individual pieces were finished. It was just time to strap this thing together with some Velcro and elastic and then do the final details. I assembled the head together, did some animatronic tests and ended up leaning into the jitteriness of the servos and nailed down each painful effort Afton is putting into every movement. I spent like a day just adding wires around the body and doing some final paint touch-ups, as well as some small joint details between the arms and the legs. Now, it was time to finally wear this thing. After about a month and a half of build time, Springtrap was finally complete. Now here's some footage from our first full test fitting. Huge thanks to FrameBreaker for composing an original song for this. You can support them on their platforms, which will be linked in the description and the card. I'm extremely proud of this build. It took a month and a half of work, but I think I've managed to one-up my original Springtrap suit. Now I can make more videos of Springtrap running around in public. Let me know where you want to see him go. Since I'm in Vegas, I'm gonna definitely try to take him to the strip, so we'll see what I end up getting into. A huge thank you to Coscom and U2's for sponsoring a gigantic part of this build. U2 sponsored about 66 of the entire budget, which was super awesome of them, and Coscom supplied all the foam for this project. Whew, okay, now I can rest for a moment until I start the next build. Okay, I'm just gonna recline in my reclining chairs I used to recline in, and hopefully nothing bad happens during my rest. Oh, who could that be? Hello? Nick Fury? No, I don't want to be part of your team. Stop calling me. Man, that guy's been bothering me for ages. Something about a weird threat in the vague shape of a